Great. Hello, everybody. My name is Jane Winters, and I'm Professor of Digital Humanities at the School of Advanced Study in the University of London. And today I'm going to reflect briefly on histories and archives of the internet from the perspective of digital humanities. Digital humanities is notoriously hard to pin down as a field. We spend a lot of time arguing about what it is and isn't. And it's characterised by diversity, if anything, at all. So I can't make any claims to comprehensiveness or even representativeness in what I'm going to say today. But my own professional training is as a historian, so that shapes my particular focus and interests. And as you've already heard from Niels and Brian, I came in a very older route as well, a medieval historian who then moved into producing digital editions and then on to working in web archives. So thinking about the question that frames this session, who cares about these archives and histories? I'd like to focus on four main themes: use, access, value, and the linked questions of ephemerality and preservation. Turning to use first, we're going to hear today, and already have this morning, about multiple actual and potential uses for archives of technology, the web, and the internet. From the archived web to the collections of cultural heritage institutions like the Science Museum Group, to the interviews and oral histories created and archived by the AIT. Some of the most interesting digital research projects combine all of these types of primary source to consider histories of digital communication in the round, drawing on expertise from a wide range of disciplines and sectors. One striking example is the Web90 project, led by Valérie Schaffer, which studied memories and histories of the web in France in the 1990s, from the perspectives of history, law, political science, information science, and science and technology studies, with digital humanities helping to translate between practitioners and researchers with different specialisms and ways of working. Findings from interdisciplinary research of this kind can be used to inform policy making, although we've heard some of the challenges around that earlier, to understand the social and cultural impact of the internet in local and national contexts, to gain insight into the barriers to adoption of particular technologies, and so on. But the uses to which these enormously rich archives can be put depends on who is able to access them and how they can then be analysed, published, and reused. The problems of working with 20th century archives, of negotiating copyright and data protection legislation, are well known, and they are even more present for researchers interested in the most contemporary history. And that's why it's so wonderful that the AIT interviews are open and available for everybody. Just to take one example, the field that I work in, the archives of the .uk web domain are only accessible on site in the reading rooms of the UK's 6 legal deposit libraries, not online, and they can't be analysed at scale easily. The HTML is hidden from the user, and it's not possible to copy and paste text. And I'll come back to the fact that, as some people in the room know all too well at the moment, the UK Web Archive is currently not accessible anywhere at all. And access is absolutely key. Speaking about digital archives, but it's relevant for archives and technology more generally, Paul Corbin at the National Library of Australia notes that without access, preservation is little more than a costly and meaningless storage burden. It's not enough just to capture and keep data. Who are these archives being collected, curated, and preserved for? And how are they being catalogued, indexed, and presented? Within digital humanities, we spend a lot of time discussing the difficulties posed for researchers by archives that are wholly or partially locked away, and devising strategies for mitigating restrictions of different kinds. But researchers, again, as we've just heard, are not the only audience for histories of the internet and digital technologies. There's a clear public interest in understanding the context for the software, devices, protocols, and infrastructures that shape people's lives. And that context is in the archives. Even if the archives of the internet were to be entirely open, they would not immediately become meaningfully accessible to non-specialists. There's a need for histories and stories, and there is huge promise in digital storytelling as a means to communicate some of the complexity of these archives that are available for study And I promise that Brian and I did not talk about that beforehand. It's coincidental that we're both going to advocate for digital storytelling today. That brings me to the question of the value of and the values embedded in the archives of the digital. The histories of the internet are not just those of elites, but of ordinary and often overlooked men and women. This is another area of huge interest in digital humanities, with researchers like Mar Hicks exploring the failure of the British computer industry to capitalise on a highly trained female workforce in the 1960s and 70s. And Julianne Nyhan uncovering the hidden, for which we've neglected, contribution of female key punch operators to the development of digital humanities itself. More diverse stories are beginning to be told, but there is work to be done both to curate more representative archives and to explore them through different lenses for different audiences. When resources are limited, demonstrating value is a really important task. I'd like to finish by touching on the fundamental challenge of creating and maintaining sustainable archives from which histories of digital technologies can be constructed and shared. Not all of the archives of the web and the internet are, of course, themselves digital, but many of the primary sources for current and future research do take digital form and may rely on now obsolete hardware and infrastructure to be accessed. Christoph Zeller is perhaps overstating things when he comments that destruction is the constant companion of digital collections, but the vulnerability of digital archives and digital information has been brought sharply into focus in the UK by October's ransomware attack on the British Library. As of today, the online catalogue is still unavailable, although through a huge amount of work, a limited version is due to go online next week. But the UK Web Archive is currently inaccessible. The specialist work of digital preservation has never been more important or urgent. It will be essential if the histories of the internet are to be recorded and given due attention in the future. I don't know if you're aware of the global bit list of endangered digital species that's produced annually by the Digital Preservation Coalition, which has its red, amber and green lists. It already identifies pre-World Wide Web video text, data services and bulletin board services as, quote, practically extinct. That's a rather depressing note to end on, but a more positive takeaway is that the future of working with the archives of the digital, of addressing difficult questions of use, access, value and sustainability, is a collaborative and interdisciplinary one that makes a value of diverse knowledge and expertise of the kind that's assembled in this room today. Events like this are a hugely important means of bringing key groups and individuals together to help shape that future. Thank you very much.
Could Niels and Brian just step forward just for the final panel for this section? Just while they're coming forward, Brian, if you could join us as well. Jane, just in terms of how to open up the UK Web Archive, do you have any suggestions you'd like to share with the audience? And then what we'll do is take questions from the full audience on yours and the previous speakers.
I mean, I should say that there are people who work on the UK Web Archive in the room who will know much more about this than I do, and who've been working very closely with researchers to do exactly that. There was due to be a review of access arrangements, which has been shoved into the long grass like so many things these days. And I think it's really a question of feeding into consultations, lobbying for access, perhaps initially for researchers, but then more generally wider access, because it's legal deposit legislation that prohibits the really open access to these archives. So it's about demonstrating value, telling the stories of what we can do with this material, what we're missing out on by not having access to it, and working to get legislative change, unfortunately, is the only way that that's going to happen.
So what is the body that's dealing with that called legal deposit legislation? What is the institution or association that's taking the lead on it?
I don't think there is one. There is a, I'm sort of looking at, Nicola will know, she's from the British Library.
You happy to say something, Nicola?
Oh, hi, yes. It's the Joint Committee of Legal Deposit, and the Joint Committee of Legal Deposit Legislation is made up of representatives from the UK legal deposit libraries, but it's also made up of publisher groups in the UK, or rather the legal advisors of the publisher groups. And so what it's trying to do is strike a balance between opening up these collections for researchers, for members of the public, but protecting the commercial interests of the publishers. Now, the publishers in JCLD are very heavily represented by large media publishers, and there isn't a representative of the long tail of smaller publishers on the web who are charities and think tanks and, well, everybody really, because we can't really pinpoint one organisation that represents all of these inverted commas publishers. So really there's a little bit of a tension between the commercial interests of the publishers and of the libraries.
We need to find a way to put them on the scales, really, I think.
Yes, and even if it's not fully representative, it also needs a government department owning it. So I suspect JCLD would work with DCMS on this,
yeah.
And it would be quite important to understand the policy lead in government and how they're working with JCLD. But maybe we could take that offline and think whether the AIT has some role in that area. Can we come back to the panelists? And are there any questions people would like to pose from the audience to any? Please.
Jim Norton, can I just strongly support what Brian Sudlow was saying about storification and take it slightly wider? Mike, you as a fellow of the Royal Academy will know where I'm coming from here. And that is, several years ago, the Academy tried to access Generation Z to bring more people into engineering. The programme This is Engineering was on life support for some time until we worked out actually how to do it. And that was 5 to 7 minute short videos. It has been enormously successful, 4 or 5 times the anticipated volume of traffic. So if you want to look at how that's done, not with storification, but with current, then it's on the web, thisisengineering.co.uk, I think.
And I think there's a good case to say how would it move forward.
Exactly.
You know, if you look at that as a source.
I think storification going into This is Engineering would be brilliant.
And there's a gentleman right behind you. Yeah.
Yeah, this one's for Jen. Could you tell me how the web archive and the internet archive in America, are they complementary or are they doing something different?
They are complementary, and there's partial unknown overlap, I would say. It's very unclear what's in the Internet Archive, with the nature of the crawling process. They don't know themselves everything that's in there. So there is a subset of information for the UK, which was backfilled pre-legal deposit legislation extension from the Internet Archive. So there's direct crossover there. And it's one of the challenges of demonstrating the value of investment in that activity in the UK is that it's closed, whereas people, oh, but I can just go and look at it on the Internet Archive, when you can't. The depth of the crawling and the targeted nature towards British cultural life is not there in the Internet Archive. And it's a wonderful resource for anyone who uses it a lot. You very soon hit the limitations because it, doesn't go very deep on a lot of sites, and you don't have the structure around it and the focus on UK elections, that kind of thing that you would get in the UK Web Archive.
Thank you.
The gentleman in the 4th row from the back, from the front. Sir, yes.
Excuse me. John Aker. It's a question for Brian. Really enjoyed it. I was just thinking about the use of these digital storytelling short videos as a way of challenging biases and assumptions. Right? And I was wondering, how do you get around the sort of echo chamber effect? Essentially, once these short videos are in the wild and they are shared by people, essentially people share things which they agree with, which they find, that generally align with their assumptions of their views. So you basically then get it shared with people who are also within essentially the same range of interests. So it's very difficult to get these short videos out and in front of the eyes of people who might be challenged by them. And of course, one of the important functions of history is challenge assumptions and be critical. So I just wondered, how do you find ways of getting people to think critically about the past in a way that can inspire the future?
It's a great question. I think we've exchanged emails, in fact, in the past, haven't we? Yeah. Look, at the moment, I think the project's not yet developed enough to tackle that question. I know how I would propose to my team to tackle that question. And Ahmad, who I'm working with, is online now. So I have, along with the insights from history project, I'm also working on a book about technocritical thinkers. And from my perspective, I'd like to see our library, as it grows, be enriched by perspectives from thinkers about technology who can provide that critical angle. I don't know how that's going to sit with the funders, into the Interact Network, who funded the past two projects that we've worked on, explicitly aim to promote the adoption of digital technologies. And in fact, Ahmad and I had an argument about the wording of our gateway video. We've created a gateway video for the library that we're aspiring to create. And it was we had this argument about the wording around the word choice. And I said, no, we have to say smart choice. We must say smart choice, because otherwise we're leaving out that critical dimension that you're referring to, John. So there you go. Sorry, that's not a very satisfactory answer, but I think we're just once we've got a wider library, then hopefully we can position some videos within that library which can provide some more of that critical dimension. Of course, in itself, I mean, that may just remain, a paradox, an enduring paradox here, because in a way, that audience isn't going to look at those libraries, that library, unless they are interested, in a way, in adopting these technologies or thinking proactively about how one can do that. Will they also consider questions about, I don't know, degrowth or digital minimalism or things like this? I don't know, but there we go. Sorry, I hope that speaks a little bit anyway to some of you.
We need to move on to another question because there's time limits. Maybe you could speak offline if you wouldn't mind. Gentleman, second row.
Yeah, James Fleck. Thanks to the panel for the discussion. Quite rightly, you're focusing on access, but I've got another question, and that is, what about knowing where the resources are? Is there an index to all the extant resources that might be useful for history of the internet? For instance, recently I've heard about resources at Burnt Island in Scotland, Blackfoot Hill Observatory in Edinburgh, and I myself have got stuff that I'm just about to throw away that is, I think, relevant from the early history of artificial intelligence in the late 70s and 80s, including tapes and so on. And how is there an effort to collate and to provide an index of all these disparate resources? I imagine every university probably has got a little resource hidden away in the library. Are these, so access is secondary to identifying where the resources are?
Well, maybe Niels could take it from an international point of view, and you could say what you know from a UK point of view, Jane.
Because I'm not very familiar with the UK perspective in this respect. But looking for my own country, Denmark, I'm not sure there is anything systematically going on in terms of collecting things. It's more like people like you sitting with, oh, I got all this stuff. What do I do with it? Where do I go? And it's my impression that cultural heritage institutions, they're not begging to get that, because it's sort of resources spent to receive it, to keep it up and running, and to do things with it. So I think it's really difficult, especially because there's so much out there, I think. So yeah, so I don't have any good solutions.
But an index of the leading collections would be quite useful, wouldn't it?
That would be quite useful. I'm mostly familiar with web archives, as you just talked about. And there is indexes about that. You can find a Wikipedia page that lists all the international web archive collections. So that's one thing. Also, there is an international web archive coalition called the Internet Preservation Consortium, and they have a long list of all the web archives that are part of their coalition, their organization. So that's also a place to start if you want to study the web as it has been archived.
Jane, would you like to comment?
Yes, it's a pretty disparate picture, I think, and it involves going to lots of different centralising bodies, I suppose. That the National Archives has an excellent listing of small archives across the UK that's accessible through its main Discovery catalogue now. There are thousands in there with quite detailed information about the kinds of collections that they hold. Towards the National Collection, I don't know if you've heard of that, which is the current funding stream within the UK to look at building a National Cultural Heritage Collection, which takes in libraries, archives and museums. And John Agar and I are involved in a project with the Science Museum group there, so I think that will be exposing some of those collections, and that's starting to link up between small collections like Saltaire Mills with what's held in the Science Museum group, and try and build those links as well. Neil's mentioned the International Internet Preservation Consortium, but there isn't one place. They are dotted around, but there are starting to be aggregating points, which might mean you're able to look in 3 or 4 places rather than 30 or 40. But I completely agree as well from colleagues in our library and archive. They, I think, the initial reaction to anyone wanting to deposit collections with them is a sort of horror. Because, yeah, exactly. So what happens to those small collections are really important, but no one's got the resources to take them on is a really interesting and tricky issue.
But I think maybe offline it'd be good if you would like to think about what would be the best way to create at least a UK index of the leading collections. Maybe a better link to an international list as well at some point. But I don't think we're going to resolve it now. I just think the concept of an index is a good idea. Any other questions? If not, we need to move on to the next panel. Sir.
Hi. Oh, sorry.
Just one in the room and then we'll come to you online.
Okay.
I'm Chris Reynolds, and as a hobby, I've been very much involved with genealogy and family history. And one of the things that I have noticed is there are a lot of people that are interested. And for instance, a few years ago, there was an excellent website privately maintained by a particular individual on the history of Watford, including a lot of original research. The first I knew he had died is that the renewal of the fund fees for that website had been taken down. And there are quite a lot of smaller cases I know about where I think in the past people would have written books. They're now putting it online, and they may be good, not necessarily in computing, but original research, which is getting lost.
I think that comes directly back to the value of the UK Web Archive, because that website will be in the UK Web Archive. I'm saying that very confidently. It will be there. But at the moment, you could only look at it by going into the reading room.
I think my own website is going to go into it, but on the other hand, this is going back perhaps 7 or 8 years.
It will still be there. Just not easy to get to.
And if it's before that time, you can probably find it in the Internet Archive, which you talked about just a minute ago. But you actually write family history has actually been a strong driver in the development of the web. Strangely enough, but it sort of makes sense in a way when you start thinking about it.
Can we just take the last question online because we are time limited? Sorry, couldn't catch you online. Your name? You want to come in now?
I'm Stephanie. I'm the co-host. I'm asking a question on behalf of Jane Vincent. Jane has asked, do the panel have any suggestions for funding opportunities to deliver new research? I'm thinking particularly of histories of women in technology.
I'm happy to take that offline with Jane Vincent, unless people want to respond from the floor today. Okay, I'll contact Jane Vincent offline if you don't mind, Stephanie.
Okay,
Is
thank
that
you.
your last question
That's
online?
yes, that is, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Well, can we thank the first panelists for being very open? That was great. I'm not